A senior Hamas official in Turkey says the terrorist organization is nearing a breaking point because of Israel's military operations in Gaza, along with the loss of cooperation from Bashar al-Assad's dictatorship in Damascus. Now, that's according to a report from Israel Hayom. Now, to discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, who joins us once again from the foreign desk in Los Angeles. Lisa, it appears as though Hamas is suffering from a genuine leadership crisis. Could this be the end of the terrorist group known as Hamas?
No, it should be. It should be the end of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and of course, leading up to the fall eventually of the Islamic Republic in Iran, because that is where this is all rooted. The support of terrorism. There will be more proxies in the future because they just keep supporting them and feeding them and giving them the supplies to do that. They're the #1 world sponsor of terror, and that hasn't changed for 45 years. And of course, we're hearing this from a Hamas official who says October 7th ruined us. And of course, Bashar al-Assad leaving Syria was the final nail in the coffin, because that's, now it's become almost impossible for them to have regional support right close to Israel to get their weapons sent through Syria to Israel, et cetera, et cetera. So we hope, listen, this is if this is in fact true, you messed around, you found out, Israel obviously retaliated in a way that was going to be exponential to what they had planned. So give it up, right? Give back the hostages. Let's get this thing ended and sorted through. But of course, terrorists will be terrorists, and they will continue to fight and continue to, it's so senseless, as we all know. So yes, I think this is actually the sentiment that we are hearing from the leadership in Hamas, from Hezbollah, because the higher ups have been killed. Many are fearful for their lives. Many have been outed, regardless of whether they were posing as journalists, as UNRWA workers. They've been exposed. So the jig is up. Give it up. Give the hostages back, and let's just put this whole thing to an end.
A think tank in the United Kingdom says the Palestinian death toll for the Gaza war appears to include thousands who died from natural causes in an effort to maybe inflate the toll of women and children. Now, the Henry Jackson Society says the mainstream media were a little too quick to accept the figures from the terrorist group Hamas, like you and I have chatted about before, that are being manipulated for propaganda needs here.
Right. So, I mean, when you see this report and it kind of broke over the weekend, it's almost like, duh, we all know. And the report basically outlines how the numbers were inflated. There were not as many children and women and innocent civilians killed as we were hearing from the mainstream media that was quoting the Gaza ministry, which is Hamas. There's so many different angles to this. Obviously, a lot of those who were killed were actual terrorist operatives. So that's another thing that's on the table. And of course, the Gaza Health Ministry, again, Hamas, was feeding these fake numbers to the mainstream media. The mainstream media was eating it up and spewing it out. And that is where the world got these numbers to quote. And the bottom line, Hal, is when I saw this report, I thought to myself, those who read this and knew are saying, okay, duh, there's no surprise here. And those who don't want to believe it will just ignore it. So what is the percentage of people reading this report and actually being informed and changing their opinions of what happened and understanding that this is in fact a terror organization and we should not be taking any numbers from the Gaza Health Ministry? Now, the Biden administration did fight back, and I remember watching John Kirby and others at their press briefings with the White House reporters who just kept pushing back on these numbers. And what about these numbers? And what about these numbers? And they would remind them, these are coming from the Gaza Health Ministry. We really don't want to take these numbers. So, obviously it's not going to happen in the Trump administration. They know better. And maybe a report like this is quite timely to remind people of the propaganda efforts, not just by Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis, but of course, the Islamic Republic, the regime in Iran as well.
Lisa, the head of Hezbollah says they've lost their supply route through Syria following the toppling of President Assad and following that sweeping rebel offensive. Now, under Assad, Iran-backed Hezbollah used Syria to bring in weapons and other military equipment from Iran through Iraq and Syria and into Lebanon to fight Israel.
Right. So again, here's another, kind of like an admission, right? So yes, we've been weakened. Not only have our top leaders been killed and our top commanders been eliminated, but we can't even get the weapons to us the way that we were getting in the past. Well, not only that, but now you have January 20th, you have President Trump coming into office. He, of course, will put the sanctions back on Iran's regime, not to be able to sell oil and to sell weapons and to collect money through central banks, the way that the Biden administration was very kind to them, allowed them to, get money for hostages, get money from selling oil, to sell weapons to Russia, for example. So all of these will be scaled back. They're not going to have the same kind of deep pockets that they have had for the last 4 years to fund things like October 7th and fund things like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis, while they put their own people under the guillotine, and no one says anything. All these human rights advocates and women's rights advocates and children's rights advocates are all silent when they watch this whole thing unfold in the last 4 years. So hopefully we'll see a lot of this come to surface.
The head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran confirmed that the regime in Tehran will no longer impose sanctions on the auditing of its nuclear facilities, Lisa. How concerned should we be about this here in the West?
I won't believe anything that Iran's regime says regarding surveillance. I mean, look, on the one hand, we've seen both, right? We've seen them play this little dance about we're going to comply, and then saying, you know what, we're not going to comply. We're going to stand up to the Trump administration, and we're going to continue on with our weapons program, hoping that at least the European nations and the UN kind of is fearful enough of them moving forward with their weapons program, and then to try to cut them a deal. It's not going to happen. No one believes them anymore. I think the Europeans were hoping that the Biden administration would strike a deal, but the optics were just so bad they couldn't do it, and thankfully so, that they weren't able to strike another meaningless deal like we had under President Obama. So moving forward, we know that the surveillance cameras have been shut off. We know that the Islamic Republic has not been compliant with the IAEA inspectors that have gone in. We know that they have marched forward with their weapons program. So the question then becomes, which has been asked of President Trump in the last few days, what options are still on the table when it comes to Iran's regime? Because deterrence might not be enough. So would we do preemptive strikes on their nuclear facilities in conjunction with Israel? Perhaps. Would we put sanctions back on? Absolutely. I think President Trump and his team will leave every option on the table, which is the right move, not to announce anything, leave every option on the table, to use at least the posture of deterrence, which has not been used in the last 4 years under the Biden administration, to move forward and to see what can get done diplomatically, and then leave the rest up to the Islamic Republic.
Three influential GOP senators, Lisa, who are about to play key roles in the next Congress, are quite concerned that Homeland Security and the FBI are not doing enough to protect U.S. President-elect Donald Trump and his advisors from assassination threats posed by Iran.
Right. So if the assassination attempts thus far on his life are any indication, there is a will, and we hope that there is not a way. They got too close, right? As we all watched President Trump out in Pennsylvania, the way that, everyone talks about the angle, and it was just, some people call it an act of God because it was just so incredibly close. So why did they get that close? How did they get that close? And what is the Secret Service going to do here on forward to protect his life? Obviously, when he is in the the office of president, we think that it will be a different game in terms of security and in terms of protection. But I think he'll need that kind of protection between now and January 20th as well. Obviously, there are many people out to get him, including Iran's regime that has doubled down on that threat, and they have threatened him for years. And that's not just because of the killing or assassination of Qasem Soleimani, but because they know that the next 4 years are going to be very different from the last four. So, we as Americans have to make sure that he is protected.
Andy Biggs, who represents Arizona's 5th Congressional District, blasted the head of Citizenship and Immigration Services for her agency allegedly approving illegal border crossers as sponsors for even more illegal border crossers, Lisa.
The blind leading the blind, right? So it's like, people who come in illegally can then petition for other people to come in as well. There will be an absolute overhaul of our immigration process. We are a nation of immigrants, and we always say this, Hal, you and I, because I think Canada has a very similar issue, and we have an issue with our northern border as well. we all want to be safe and we all want to let legal immigrants into our countries and we want them to settle in and have a better life. But the way that things are right now, nobody is safe. The migrants are not safe. The coyotes are taking advantage of them. Women are getting raped. People are getting sick. People are drowning. It's not a proper process for anybody. So obviously this whole system has to be overhauled and there have to be laws and people have to come in the legal way, and and then we can absorb them as a nation as well. They can have the proper resources. They won't have to live out on the streets and get involved in drugs and prostitution and all the other things that we're seeing right now with migrants coming into the country. So to give them a fair chance, to give our own countries a fair chance to absorb them properly, there will be a reform of the system.
Now, Lisa, we have some breaking news here as well on the desk of Bridge City News. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz lost a confidence vote, and it appears as though the Germans are going back to the polls in February.
That's right. February 23rd, there will be snap elections. Olaf lost the confidence vote here. Social Democrats, this might be part of the referendum that we're seeing across Europe, across the world, frankly, of the pendulum swinging from the left at least to the center, if not to the right. We're seeing this in many different places. Now Germany can join the list as well. We'll see what will happen in February. I don't want to speak too soon, but this was a pull from Olaf Scholz and the Social Democrats, who were not able to bring the confidence vote. So we shall see what will happen. But again, I do see a larger trend in this happening across the world, and in particular in Europe.
South Korea's parliament has voted to impeach President Yoon over his martial law order. Now, Lisa, it's a move that ended days of political paralysis, but set up an intense debate over Yoon's fate. The National Assembly passed the motion to impeach 204 to 85. So apparently Yoon's presidential powers and duties have been suspended now, and Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, the country's #2 official, took over presidential powers over the weekend.
Yeah, so this political chaos is nothing new to South Korea, unfortunately. But 6 hours of martial law was not something that the country had any appetite for. In his defense, Yoon says these were all North Korean supporters. We had to put a stop to it, but it's a no. So whether or not they were going to be able to remove him or have him resign, they wanted him out. He has no political future in South Korea, and that is what we're watching unfold.
Let's talk about what's unfolding, of course, in Ukraine. Any off-ramp yet? Are Putin and Zelensky potentially getting together? Has Trump reached out to both, say, let's bring an end to this war once and for all?
Well, they have both wanted to sit down with Trump. Trump obviously giving messages to both sides about having some sort of off ramp. This has to end, right? So, Hal, we do know that there is some a desire on both sides to at least bring this to some sort of conclusion, and obviously from the Trump administration as well, to put an end to this in a way that is quick and kind of stops the senseless deaths. We know that there's so many different angles to this. It has escalated in the last few weeks in certain ways, by the way, and we're watching as that nuclear option is still on the table for Russia. Obviously, we don't know what this madman will do, but I do believe that both Putin and Zelensky do have more confidence in this coming to an end because Trump is coming into office January 20th, and of course, we'll see. Hopefully, they can come up with a creative way that both sides will come to the table and end this war as soon as possible.
Do you think we'll see certain areas of Ukraine being annexed, going back to Russia, maybe certain Russian villages that Putin really had his eyes on? What are your sources telling you right now?
Yeah, that is actually what looks like will happen. I can't see it any other. I can't see it going back to what it was 3 years ago in terms of Ukraine being Ukraine, because Russia has advanced too far. And look, Hal, we talked about this. We thought this was going to be a war of weeks, not years, in terms of Russia's ability to annex completely all of Ukraine and not just parts of it. So, at the very least, I do think that is what will happen. I also know that there are mixed views as to what should happen and what will happen and what many on the ground want to happen. There are many Ukrainians that want to be annexed to Russia. They speak the language, they feel that they connect with Russia, and there are those who are Ukraine all the way and have so much patriotism and nationalism for the Ukrainian flag and just Ukraine being its own independent entity. So there will have to be a compromise, but I do think, to your point, that there will be parts that will be annexed.
Lisa, what about Russian President Vladimir Putin beefing up his military with more North Korean troops? What are you hearing?
Yeah, Zelensky actually pointed this out and saying that we're seeing many more North Koreans. We're actually seeing many more North Korean casualties as well. Look, this is a deal that he cut with North Korea, being able to bring in more military might. As you know, there's an issue with the number of Russian casualties, being able to draft Russian men of a certain age. They try to, pull all kinds of things by lowering the age, getting them from elsewhere, letting people out of prison, just to get, more people in uniform out to fight. So this kind of solved their problem. They got North Koreans there. They cut a deal with North Korea. But again, I do hope that we do see an end to this senseless war, regardless of casualties on both sides, and now North Korean casualties, that there should be no more senseless deaths in this war.
Amen to that. She's our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Thanks again for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.